and welcome to Father Spitzer's Universe. I'm Doug Keck at the intersection of faith and reason. I'm your host, coming to you live from our EWTN studios in the mothership in Irondale, Alabama. Just reminding everybody, each week you can email us questions for Father Spitzer at spitzer'suniverse@ewtn.com. Post your questions on Facebook, very important. We get a lot of questions from there at facebook.com/EWTN online, hashtag FSUniverse. And you can send us a tweet as well at twitter.com/EWTN, hashtag FSUniverse. And don't forget, very important to Father Spitzer, the Magis Center website, magiscenter.com. And we've got a wonderful topic today, again, talking about the evidence of God. And with that being the case, we're going to switch right out to the man in the know out in California at the Christ Cathedral. And it's great to see you, Father Spitzer, again, blessing us with your presence once more here on EWTN and welcoming us to your universe.
Well, thank you, Doug. It's great to be back with you and with your amazing sense of humor.
That's right. Amazing. In other words, not very good, but somewhat different than normally permitted on EWTN.
See, it's already good.
There we go. Listen, we've got good news besides your latest book that's out. We've also got good news that's starting in June. We're going to be adding a replay of this program on a weekly basis on Sundays at noon Eastern time. People can listen on the radio for Father Spitzer's Universe. So another way to reach out. We've been testing it out, and we found that the program actually works better on radio than on TV. No, I'm just kidding. It actually works as well on radio as it does on TV. And so we found that helpful, and we're going to roll that out. And hopefully we'll get some people listening, and maybe it'll drive them to the radio feed, which is wonderful, or maybe some people listening on radio will pick up on the television program as well, which is on every Wednesday at this time. Check out EWTN.com for the full schedule of how we re-air. And again, evidence of God's existence. Is there evidence of God's existence from science? And before we get into that, I had a question for you, and this was something I picked up. We've heard a lot of these names. We hear Hawkings, and the other ones is Richard Dawkins. And he has that famous book, of course, The God Delusion, that we've heard a lot about when it has to do with atheism. And he has something called the spectrum of theistic probability. What is that, and how does one use that, and why was that created?
Well, Dawkins himself was at one time an atheist, and he kind of shifted a little bit over toward agnosticism, but he called it, a sort of a skeptical agnosticism, leaning toward atheism, but nonetheless it was agnosticism. And agnosticism, means I don't know, really. I'm not sure whether God exists or not, which is different from atheism, which is a denial of the existence of God. So on the very, left extreme, if you could put it that way, of the theistic probability, you have there is no probability of God. That would be an atheist. And then, of course, the minute you say, well, there is, some possibility of God, you're on that spectrum of theistic probability. And of course, Dawkins, he views himself at kind of the atheist end. He's not sure, but sort of skeptical. And then, of course, you could go all the way, to the middle, where you say, well, I'm not sure, but I'm leaning toward theism, because I think, maybe because of the Board of Lincoln and Guth proof, or maybe because of the entropy evidence, or maybe because of the Big Bang, or maybe because of what's called fine tuning. Maybe there is evidence for God, and maybe he's not wholly inconsistent with science. And then finally, of course, you have where about 45% of bench scientists are today, and that would be theism. So that would be, I consider the existence of God to be highly probable in light of science. And like I said, somewhere between 40 to 45% of bench scientists declare themselves to be theists. So that would mean high probability of God's existence. A lot of the ones who don't declare themselves to be theists, by the way, are somewhere in that range of agnosticism, and only really it's not a huge number are declared atheists. So, but there are certainly declared atheists as well.
Do you find sometimes in speaking to young people, especially, and that's been your forte over the years with universities, things where there tends to be people who really are kind of agnostic, who then call themselves atheists when they're really not?
Yeah, well, I mean, yeah, because of course it's a vogue thing to do. I mean, the last thing a young person wants is to be accused of needing a crutch, right? Or to be accused of, perhaps, not having the guts to face reality. So when somebody actually criticizes their faith, instead of going, well, wait a minute, I know there might be some arguments here that should be considered from the vantage point of science itself, which we'll be discussing in this program. A lot of them will just say, well, I can handle it. I don't need a crutch. I guess I'm an atheist. And of course, it's what I call pressurized atheism. In other words, you're kind of a coward if you don't declare yourself, or you're not in vogue. You don't have that kind of avant-garde intellectual kind of capacity to declare yourself an atheist. And a lot of if you're insecure, right, and a lot of adolescents have not come yet to their sort of real self-identity. They're still kind of looking around for acceptance from a lot of people. They're not looking for self-acceptance first, then the acceptance of others. There's still acceptance of others first, then self-acceptance. In that case, a lot of times they can be pressurized into atheism or try to look very avant-garde, which means look very intellectual, by declaring themselves an atheist.
I hate to say
and
it.
Of course, they have no idea.
Yeah, I hate to say it. I think sometimes with the poor vocabulary out there, most people know what an atheist is. They're not sure what an agnostic even is. If somebody said, well, I'm agnostic.
Yeah.
I mean, you hear about it more actually in technology today. The word agnostic gets used when you talk about some open system that's agnostic. That's where you hear it more.
Yeah. Oh yeah, we need to do a better job in our schools and a better job in our religious education, both, in informing people about, what the gradations are. And like I said, even, even Dawkins, who used to be a radical atheist, has now moved to the agnostic side. So, I mean, there's no reason why, if Dawkins can do that, why would any young person who does not have scientific knowledge at all, or maybe has a limited amount of scientific knowledge, move to the radical extreme of atheism? My answer is they don't know any better. That's generally the reason.
Would you give him some credit for some level of honesty, maybe, in the sense of being willing to go and move forward that way?
Yeah, I do give him credit for that, and I do give, there have been several atheists who've really moved their position as well to theism, and I give them credit for doing that. In the case of Dawkins, though, I must admit that, he leaves out so much evidence for God from both philosophy and science. It's utterly stunning. I mean, the old logical expressions is like Logic 101. What's the thing you learn the first day? There are far more errors of omission than commission. If you leave out huge volumes worth of evidence for God, and you sort of give this kind of trite sort of approach to atheism, there, I have dashed off St. Thomas Aquinas. Well, no, he didn't dash off St. Thomas Aquinas. He basically gave a facile explanation for the 5 ways and never talked about Thomas's metaphysics, never demonstrated that he had any grasp of the real distinction between existence and essence or the ontological priority of existence over essence. I mean, for all intents and purposes, it was really a straw man, not Thomas Aquinas, who kind of got dashed off. And so, that sort of thing, that kind of mitigates I get good feelings about Dawkins' honesty on the one hand when he sort of says, well, I'm sort of like an agnostic leaning toward atheism rather than atheist. But then, of course, when he does those real errors of omission, and Stephen Hawking does some pretty radical errors of omission as well, and we'll probably talk about that in the next episode. That's the stuff that really gets me, because, you really do do have to present the case for theism and then criticize the good case for theism if you really want to be an atheist, right? Because, of course, you cannot disprove the existence of God rationally. It's not possible. You can't do it by an empirical method, right, which is what we call a posteriori evidence. And why can't you? Because if you're going to disprove God or disprove anything by a posteriori evidence, by an empirical method, you would need to observe everything that there was to observe. Notice that you had the capacity to observe everything that there was to observe, and then notice that God wasn't there. Now, can this ever be done? No, because the first problem is you can't observe anything outside of the universe, so that really limits your capacity. And secondly, the idea that you could observe everything in the universe is absolutely, ridiculous. So, of course, you can't ever get a posteriori evidence against God. It's a completely impossible task. So the only thing left is a priori evidence against God. And of course, if you take a priori evidence against God, that means non-contradictory evidence against God. Well, here's the problem. In order to have a contradiction, you need to have only restricted entities can contradict other restricted entities. Okay. The law of non-contradiction can't work without restricted entities. And here's the problem. God is an unrestricted, uncaused reality existing through itself. And so how can you disprove by contradiction an unrestricted reality? The answer is you can't. It's impossible. Therefore, if you can't do it with a priori evidence, and you can't do it with a posteriori evidence, and you can't do it with a combination of both because you got no possibility of doing it with either, then you're not going to ever disprove God rationally. That's not possible. So the only way you can be, I believe, a rational atheist is you're going to have to take the real evidence that exists, the good case that's been made in science and in philosophy, and critique it significantly to show that it is ineffective. And that I defy can be done. So, I mean, I have a whole website, magicenter.com.
Right.
Just go to the faith and science thing. We've got philosophical proofs of God, Thomistic proofs of God, scientific evidence for God. That's the case. Right. There's a lot of evidence there. And just don't blow off the theory of entropy. We'll talk about that today. Can't just blow off the Board of Lincoln and Guth proof. You're not just going to blow off the fine-tuning evidence, and you're not just going to blow off, the Thomistic real distinction between existence and essence. You're not going to blow off Lonergan's proof for God. I mean, these are things that are exceedingly well established, that have passed the muster of very good scholars and scientists for a long, long time, which are excellent rational grounding for the existence of God.
Well, now that we've talked about,
my thought is,
we kind of dashed Dawkins on that one, and we've got so many questions we want to get to it. And also because of the fact that the evidence of God's existence, is there evidence of God's existence from philosophy, in fact, will be next week's topic. And speaking of that, Stephen Hawking has something to say about that, and we have a question about him, Father Spitzer, via email. Stephen Hawking has recently come up with an explanation of how, quote unquote, something came from nothing, end quote, which he says explains the lack of a need for a first cause or a God. I guess basically he says that the universe resulted from a type of spontaneous combustion. What is your response to Hawking? Thank you, and this is from Larry via email.
Larry, good question. I mean, yes, Stephen Hawking has made that statement. In fact, sort of instead of a spontaneous combustion, it was actually the laws of gravitation is how he put it. Let me just go back 2 steps first. And first, I just want you to read the ending part of Stephen Hawking's book, A Brief History of Time, which was written earlier than The Grand Design, which is his most recent book from which your statement came from. Now, in The Brief History of Time, Stephen Hawking actually asks, he says, look, the equations of physics cannot explain how the equations became active. So we have to ask the question, right, what ignited these equations? What was this litmus paper that ignited the equations so that the equations weren't just something in someone's mind, but that the equations of physics in fact became efficacious in the physical universe as we know it. Now, of course, that is very much an openness to God, with the suggestion at the end that God has to be the cause that does it. Now that, now flash forward about 14 years to the grand design. Now we get the exact opposite opinion. Now we have Stephen Hawking saying that it was the laws of gravitation that actually was able to generate the physical universe out of nothing. Now just a minute, let's get one thing straight. Don't be talking about nothing unless you mean nothing. And here's the thought. This goes all the way back to Parmenides, right? This is a teacher of Plato from the 5th century BC, right? And here comes Parmenides, and he just says, look, nothing is nothing. There's no such thing as nothing. Being is being. And being is not nothing, and nothing is not being. Now that makes a whole lot of sense to me. But if you want to sneak something into nothing, I don't care whether it's the laws of gravitation, I don't care whether it's spontaneous combustion, I don't care whether it's a very low energetic threshold of a false fluctuation of a quantum field, whatever it is, if it's something, please don't sneak it into nothing. Now here is the paradox, Larry. The paradox is, if you really mean prior to a beginning of physical reality, there was really nothing, and you mean nothing by nothing, then I can tell you one thing right now. When the whole universe or physical reality was nothing prior to the beginning, the only thing it could do was nothing. Because the only thing nothing can do is nothing. And if you say that nothing can do something, you are contradicting yourself, Stephen Hawking. I don't care how intelligent you are, that is a contradiction. Next level. If the universe, or all of physical reality, prior to the beginning was nothing and could only do nothing, then something else is going to have to move the universe from nothing to something when it's nothing, because it could not have moved itself from nothing to something, because the only thing it could do was nothing. Now that makes sense to me. Everything else is a blatant equivocation on the word nothing, where you're sneaking something into nothing. Now let's get to Stephen Hawking's proposition. His proposition is that the laws of gravitation, this is going to be prior to a physical universe. So these laws of gravitation, which he's equating with nothing, right? These laws of gravitation that exist prior to the physical universe, prior to physical reality. Now, if there's no physical reality for them to inhere in, then just how do the laws of gravitation exist? That's what I'd like to know. And if the laws of gravitation don't exist in a physical universe, then I would suggest that they must exist in another kind of reality that we would call a mentative reality, an intellectual reality, a thinking reality, a mentative reality, a reality, right, that we can sometimes see manifest in quantum fields, but it's going to have to be thinking is going to have to be the ground of the equations of gravity without, and the laws of gravity without a physical universe, which begs what question? In whose mind does the thought of gravitation exist? And of course, it sounds like a proof of God to me. Thanks very much, Stephen. A pre-physical, pre-universal thought of gravitational equations. What kind of a thought would that be? Well, I'm going to say it's a trans-physical, trans-universal thought of the ideas and equations of gravitation, which sounds like God to me.
Right.
So I don't think this answers any questions except proves more forcefully the need for a God at the end of the day to produce the very equations, and then, as he said in Brief History of Time, to actualize them.
Right, exactly.
But a good question, Larry. Thank you.
It was a good question and a wonderful answer. Email us questions at Spitzer's Universe at EWTN.com, and I was thinking Nothing from Nothing, an old Billy Preston song. Sounded like we got a couple of things in there with that. Well, on that note, we're going to take a break. Speaking with Father Spitzer and his universe, a couple of things to mention as we go to a break, and we'll take more questions right after the break. A couple of books to look forward to. Praying with Mother Angelica through EWTN's Religious Catalog, a wonderful book, very popular, and also My Life with Mother Angelica by Sister Mary Raphael, both available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. There's even a Spanish version of that one at EWTNRC.com. Much more with Father Spitzer on the evidence of God coming up next here on Father Spitzer's Universe. Stay with us. And welcome back to Father Spitzer's Universe. I'm Doug Keck, your host. And we're moving back quickly to California to talk to Father Spitzer. And we were talking about Mr. Richard Dawkins there as you went out, talking about his ideas about how there could be the creation of the world without a creator, so to speak. Now, that's kind of some new thoughts from him. We heard some new thoughts even maybe from what Hawkings was saying earlier. Are there other new thoughts coming out about the existence of God from science that actually kind of favors our opinion of that situation?
Yeah. I mean, as I mentioned in a previous episode, the whole idea of, proving God from science or getting evidence for God from science was really not known by St. Thomas Aquinas or by Aristotle, because they assumed that it might be possible for the universe to be eternal, although they believed, Aquinas believed, that it was factually not eternal. He thought since it was possible, you really couldn't get, physical or scientific evidence for God or a creator. However, that all changed with Monsignor Georges Lemaitre in 1927, because Father Lemaitre, a Belgian priest, discovered the Big Bang Theory, and since that time we have really validated the Big Bang Theory, which shows that our universe had its origins about 13.8 billion years ago, plus or minus 100 million years, and prior to that time, it is possible that that was a real, actual beginning of the universe. And prior to that beginning, 13.8 billion years ago, the whole universe, and maybe the whole of physical reality, which is the whole universe, was nothing. And if it was nothing, then as I said before, you're going to have something outside of the universe, some transcendent cause outside of the universe to move the universe from nothing to something, at which point you're going to need a creator, a transcendent creator. Now, if that's the case, then, all of a sudden we're at a whole new point in the history of science, right? Because now it looks like there could actually be evidence for a creator. Now, since that time, of course, there are several possibilities that people sort of generated to try and get out of this. But the real fact that we know is that the universe came, as we know it, came into existence 13.8 billion years ago. Now, what are some of these other possibilities that some physicists have used to try and extend the age of the universe backward more than 13.8 billion years? The first one, of course, was the oscillating universe, and that was a very popular theory even back in the days of Einstein and Lemaitre. So that would be, for example, the universe expanding and contracting and expanding and contracting. But as we'll see in a moment, that particular hypothesis, and the bouncing universe or the oscillating universe is just a hypothesis. But there are several things that really militate against that hypothesis. But hold on for a moment. There's another very popular view these days called a multiverse, which is like a mega universe. And the mega universe, again, completely hypothetical. We don't know whether there's a multiverse out there, but the multiverse would have, lots and lots, it'd be generating lots of little bubble universes, and all those bubble universes, among them would be our universe. So it would be one bubble universe, our universe, it would be one bubble universe, amidst trillions and trillions and trillions of other bubble universes. Now, that's another hypothetical possibility, but as we'll see in a moment, there's a thing called the Borda-Vilenkin Guth proof, which actually shows that that would probably have to have a beginning too, and I'll explain that in a moment. There's another theorem, that I'll just call it for the sake of higher dimensional space universes, right? That this would be kind of like in string theory, in M theory, which is an 11-dimensional configuration string theory, right? In M theory, you really have the possibility of having higher dimensional space, and in that higher dimensional space, you can come up with some really exotic theories, right? Like 2-3-dimensional membranes, and sandwiched between them is a 4-dimensional bulk space-time, and the membranes are colliding and producing other universes. So you've got these other possibilities that have been, thought of that might extend, the physical reality's existence back before 13.8 billion years. But here's the deal. Three pieces of evidence, or actually two pieces of evidence in particular, the theory of entropy and also the Borda-Vilenkin and Guth proof, both of them seem to suggest strongly that a multiverse is going to have a beginning. And that honestly, too, a higher dimensional string universe is going to have a beginning. Even, Borda and Vilenkin consider that possibility specifically, and that all bouncing universes, right, are also going to have a beginning. So even these three hypothetical configurations, because of the evidence of the Borda-Vilenkin and Guth proof and the entropy evidence, seem to suggest that all of them would also have a beginning, which means that physical reality, even if there were a multiverse, even if there were a higher dimensional space string universe, even if there were a bouncing universe, they too would have a beginning. So we're not going to get out of that problem. So now I'll just give you a quick explanation of the Borda-Vilenkin Guth proof. Essentially, it works because of one condition only. If any universe or multiverse has an average Hubble expansion greater than 0, that means the rate of expansion of the universe or the multiverse as a whole is greater than 0, then that configuration, multiverse, universe, it's going to have a beginning. And there's a very good reason for that. And you can go to my website, magicenter.com, and just go to the Faith and Science page where I explain all 6 steps of the proof very, very clearly to you. But right now, I'll just tell you what Alexander Vilenkin kind of concluded, at the end of explicating this proof, the Borda-Vilenkin Guth proof of 2003, along with the entropy evidence. He kind of sums it up this way. It is said that a good argument will convince a reasonable person, and that a proof will convince even an unreasonable one. Well, now that the proof is in place, that's the Borda-Vilenkin and Guth proof in conjunction with the entropy evidence. Now that the proof is in place, scientists can no longer can consider the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They must confront the reality of a beginning. So that's a beginning of a multiverse, a beginning of a inflationary universe, the beginning of our universe, the beginning of higher dimensional space universe and string theory, the beginning of a bouncing universe. Every one of those configurations, scientists aren't going to be able to avoid a beginning. And that is why so much ink is being spent on Larry's question, namely the whole area of something coming from nothing.
Right.
I mean, why is Hawking talking about this? Why are all these? Because they really they have some splaining to do.
And they're trying to figure out a way to
really
explain
is
it.
an
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, if there really
Well, Father,
is
if we
an
go,
unavoidable beginning to physical
if we go
reality.
any deeper into this on this particular program, it's going to take us 2 hours to get back up. I think the best places goes to magicenter.com and get some additional information on this. You mentioned so many different theories and things, but I guess the bottom line message is they're all trying to show how there's not a beginning or a prime mover, and the reality is all of these proofs are showing that there is in fact a prime mover, right?
Yeah, and it's scientific evidence that shows that there is, in fact, a beginning, and that beginning implies a creator. That's correct.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's bring this one down on the other end of the equation. We went from almost 14 billion years to a question from Twitter. A person says, you know, reacting to what you say, why do people who are fundamentalists, quote unquote, insist that the Earth was created in just 6 days and that the universe is only about 6,000 years old? I think that's Bishop Usher. Wouldn't you say that scientific evidence shows us different, Father? I would say, and this is from Matthew, it sounds like certainly that would be your take as well. I guess the question is, why are there people who are tied to that? And also, is it a problem for a Catholic, certainly, who believes the inerrancy of the Bible and what the Bible teaches, but at the same time understands that that kind of 6,000 years is not our literal understanding in a sense of the way the people at the time would understand it?
Right. Here's the basic reason. Yes, I do subscribe to a 13.8 billion year old universe, and as a Catholic, I'm free to do so. This actually goes back to an encyclical of Pope Pius XII. I believe it was around 1942. And the name of that encyclical is called Divino Afflante Spiritu. And you can look it up. It's online. You can read the whole thing if you want. Here's the summary of what Pope Pius XII said to Catholics about, can they believe in the scientific account versus the biblical account. He basically said that the Bible is giving us sacred truths necessary for salvation. But that's not what science is doing. Science is trying to give us a description and explanation of the physical universe based on observable evidence and, of course, quantitative method. That's science's task. Now, the Pope says, as Pope Pius XII says, okay, these are two legitimate pursuits. So the Bible, it's not meant to give us an accurate physical, description and explanation of the universe through observable evidence and mathematical method, right? That's not what it's doing. It's giving us sacred truths necessary for salvation. Well, what kind of sacred truths necessary for salvation? Well, let's look at the biblical account, and then I'll come back to the 6 days of creation and so forth. So just from the vantage point, right, of the biblical author, right? He's writing in about 500 BC, maybe as much as 600 BC, but he's back there. He's got a culture that is pre-scientific. It's pre-calculus. It's pre abstract mathematics in the sense that we know of it today. And so he has a bunch of questions and problems that he has to contend with. Now, these questions and problems deal with our salvation. They're sacred truths necessary for salvation. The first problem he's dealing with is many gods or one God. So here's this Gilgamesh epic, and there's all these many gods, and it's a really adventurous epic. So he's got to put together, the story about the truth and the truth for salvation, where he says, nope, there's only one God. There's not many gods. And then the second problem he's got to deal with is all of these things that the biblical author considers to be creation, right? He's got to show that those things are not gods. So there's not a sun god, there's not a sea god, etc., right? The sun is merely a creation of the one God. The sea is a creation of the one God. The moon is a creation of the one God. So he's got to show that, and that's a truth necessary for our salvation. The third thing is, in the Gilgamesh epic and other epics, right, people, human beings, are mere cannon fodder and playthings for the gods, right? They're not even, they don't even have the status of chess pieces on a board, right? It's obliterate a few. That's very funny, so forth and so on. But the biblical author says, no, this is not the way God looks at human beings at all. The one God looks at human beings with utmost love. He creates them in his own image and likeness. And so, of course, you have a completely different view. Then the view of matter as evil, for example, that oftentimes comes up in the ancient myth, right? The biblical author, he has to change that, right? He has to show, right, that matter is good. God created everything good. So after each day of creation, the biblical author repeats again and again, right? And God saw that it was good. So this is what the biblical author is doing. Now, getting back to your question about, well, why do some fundamentalists believe this, and why don't they have that bifurcated view that Pope Pius XII has? By the way, there can be some very good intersections between science and the biblical account of creation. They're very good intersections, but they don't have to be identical. One has sacred truths necessary for salvation, the other is physical descriptions and explanations. So now, here's the deal. In the Catholic view espoused by Pope Pius XII, we have what's called a co-participative view of inspiration. But some Christians hold to what's called a dictation view of inspiration. Now, the dictation view of inspiration would be where God comes up to me and says, Spitzer, okay, here it is. This is the truth. And it's the whole truth about everything. Just take down exactly what I say, and that's it. We don't hold to that view. What we hold to is a co-participative view of inspiration where God actually uses the brain power, the creativity of the biblical author and inspires that biblical author, right? Uses his spirit to inspire the biblical author toward the truth with a capital T that's necessary for salvation. So he's going to guide him, but he's not going to give him everything. So we would expect that the biblical author is going to use categories from his own culture. We're going to expect that he uses categories from the time in which he's living. We expect that some of those categories are going to be valid today. Some of those categories are not going to be valid today. And of course, we have to be, very prudent about which ones we retain and which ones we don't. But as Catholics, according to Pope Pius XII, we have the freedom to do this. We believe basically in this co-participative form of inspiration, and so there really is no contradiction between science and the Bible. They are each is doing their own thing, and each is doing it, for the purpose of salvation, in the case of the Bible, for the purposes of accurate scientific description, case of science, right? They're doing their own thing, but they do cross paths sometimes, and it just makes you wonder how incredible that inspiration of God is. I mean, the first day of creation, let there be light. Are you kidding me? I mean, who thought of that? Where is that in the whole writ of ancient literature? And this Hebrew guy comes up with this one, which happens to match the scientific account, just knocks you right off your feet. But anyway, there are some real coincidences like that.
And really, if you think about it, over 2,000 years, and obviously before, but certainly time of our Lord, there have been people obviously who've been saved and lived their lives and had different understanding of Scripture and didn't know about string theory and all of these things, and that didn't impact their ability to be saved. But it's important for us to, I guess, not find ourselves having to defend something that would make it look like we were defending the indefensible from a scientific perspective. So with that, So with that said, we're gonna give you a break there, Father. You've been monologuing there for a while with some wonderful answers. So we'll give you a break. Have a glass of water. We'll be back in a couple of minutes with Father Spitzer as he takes a break out there in California. I'm Doug Keck. Father Spitzer's Universe. We've got a couple of wonderful books by Father Spitzer we want to tell you all about at EWTNRC.com. This one impacts exactly what we're talking about, new proofs for the existence of God, contributions of contemporary physics and philosophy by the one and only Father Spitzer, of course. And so check that one out. And his other new book, this is a new book just out in the last month or so, God So Loved the World, Clues to Our Transcendent, Destiny from the Revelation of Jesus, and that's published by Ignatius. Again, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. You can get in touch with us. More emails, more questions for Father Spitzer right after this short break. Stay with us. Thanks again for staying with us here in Father Spitzer's Universe. I'm Doug Keck. We have so many things to talk about, including a couple of wonderful books by Father Spitzer, Finding True Happiness, Satisfying Our Restless Hearts, and of course his other wonderful work, The Soul's Upward Yearning, Clues to Our Transcendent Nature from Experience and Reason, all the basis of these programs we're doing. Wonderful information. Check out them on EWTNRC.com or the Magis Center website as well. Let's touch base with Father, see how he's doing after a refreshing glass of water. Here's our next question from you. We don't have time for you to recover too much. God is the creator of our universe. That's a statement, of course. This person says, I have no doubt. Why then has he created, it's interesting, so many lifeless planets like big gas giants with temperatures that are too hot or too cold to sustain life? One would think that a divine grand design would be more life-friendly. And this is Fred from Surf City, North Carolina. I didn't know that. I thought that song was about the West Coast, but apparently there's another Surf City. You didn't have a Woody growing up, did you, when you were in Hawaii?
No,
maybe not.
I didn't, but I got to say there was a lot of surfing going on.
Where
sure.
you were growing up, right?
So,
right. I bet you there was a couple of Woodies that in your childhood there. So what do we think about something like that? We say, okay, there's a God, but why is all this excess baggage is floating around out there?
Oh, yeah. Well, all the excess baggage, of course, all of these things have their purposes in developing planets that will have life. So, you know, for example, the big gaseous planets that are further from the sun, they actually are redirecting all kinds of things, asteroids, comets, all kinds of things that are coming in, right? The main thing with a planet like Earth, which is going to be able to sustain life, is you want some collisions with obviously other asteroids and planets that make our planet grow, but you don't want too many. You know, you want perhaps some comets crashing in there, because of course you might be able to get the elements necessary for amino acids and things, but you don't want too many. And of course, all of these different things and the interaction of all of these things, and I just consider it to be so wonderful to behold, is that when you have all of the different kinds of planets, including these huge gaseous giants, right, all kinds of planets, is they're interacting so that, basically Earth can be like Goldilocks, right? Just right.
Okay.
And if you didn't have those things, you'd have all kinds of other things crashing into the Earth, right? That wouldn't be deflected by these massive gravitational fields and other things. So, that's one reason why God does it, because it's just almost like, sometimes you look at some of these pictures that are coming back from the Hubble satellite or something, and you almost want to say to God, show off. It's just so beautiful.
Right,
it's and so as you look, I would just encourage you to look at, the Hubble Space Telescope pictures that come from NASA free of charge right on your computer there. And as you look at them, the beauty is so immense. The diversity is so immense. It's almost as if God is just showing us his hand in the microcosmic universe in the macro, the microscopic universe, and in the macroscopic universe. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I mean, just looking at galaxies and the interaction of galaxies, and then black holes. You think, well, black holes are pure negative. No, they're not. I mean, they are. You don't want to get sucked into one. That's for sure. But every single galaxy has a black hole in its center, and that's part of what keeps our galaxies together as the universe flies apart because of dark energy. See, it's dark matter in these black holes that are keeping our galaxy, sort of held together. And so what God is showing in all of this, much of which is lifeless, could never support any kind of life, is he's just showing, not just the diversity of creation and the beauty of creation, but all of the intricacies and symmetries that are going to be required to get to a planet like ours in the Goldilocks zone, in the just right zone, so that it could actually support life. And by the way, Kepler is discovering more. This is a satellite that's out there to look for.
Not the scientist himself.
Finding,
he's not with us anymore, but.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So it's considering. Yeah, that's right. Scientist himself passed away a while back, but the satellite is actually discovering a lot of planets that are in the Goldilocks zone of other stars, not just in our galaxy, but in other galaxies as well.
Okay, here's another question for you right off as we're running down on our time. Father Spitzer, I was watching a special about an experiment done in Switzerland in the atomic collider that was trying to prove that there was or was not a quote-unquote God particle. Hopefully you are familiar with this and can explain. Thank you for all you do. I'll pray for you. Thanks. And this is from Charles. And yeah, we heard a lot about that a while ago. I haven't heard as much recently. What's going on there?
Yeah, well, at CERN, in Switzerland, there was some experiments. There were also, which actually did actually show the existence of what's called the Higgs Boson. But let's just back up for a moment and talk about the God particle. The Higgs Boson is only called the God particle because basically Peter Higgs, as I understand it, who was the developer of this incredibly important and great theory, the last sort of part of elementary particle physics. As I heard the story, he came to his publisher and he had so much difficulty locating the particle that he wanted to call it, well, the GD particle,
Oh,
and
okay.
the publisher said, well, Peter, you can't use the D word in the title of your book. Oh, drop it. And it just became the God particle.
Oh, okay.
Now, just to make matters clear, the relevance of the Higgs field, right? Now, a Higgs boson indicates the presence of a Higgs field. And the Higgs field is very important because in the first moments after the Big Bang, right, you have this tremendous release of energy, but you need to slow that energy down in order to get what's called rest mass. And that conversion of energy to rest mass at the beginning of the universe was the last piece in the particle of elementary particle physics. Now that Higgs field functions almost like molasses or something. Basically, it's the energy as it passes through the Higgs field is being slowed down in a way that's creating the phenomenon of rest mass, which of course gives rise to the particles that we know of, heavy particles, right, that would be like hadrons, neutrons, and protons and things of that nature. Now, of course, is it an important part of the unfolding of the universe? Absolutely. Does it replace the creation event? No. Is it prior to the Big Bang? No. Is it does it replace God or a creator at the beginning of our universe or the beginning of physical reality? No. So it really is not a God particle. It's a complete misnomer. It just had to do with, let's say, an exchange between Peter Higgs and his publisher, as I understand it, which wound up, becoming the God particle. But is it an important discovery? It's an absolutely important discovery.
Okay, great.
I mean, without a Higgs field, we can't explain rest mass, and that makes particle theory rather incomplete.
That's interesting, and it's always interesting how these things come about in many times an unscientific way. Here, we got one last question before we go.
Sure.
Father Spitzer, I'm one of those agnostics who is open to evidence and who was brought up with a very ugly fundamentalist view of an angry, punishing God. I'd like to believe in God, but not an angry, horrible God like the one I grew up with. And is there scientific evidence for a loving and compassionate God and for quote-unquote heaven or some kind of eschaton, good eschaton? Also, can you tell me where I can find some credible information about near-death experiences? Thank you so much, Pam. I'm sure the Magis Center website would be good for that, but go ahead, Father.
Yeah, just really quickly, one of the books that Doug just referenced is called The Soul's Upward Yearning. I have a whole chapter on near-death experiences in there, chapter 5. It is footnoted with all of the major studies, the Parnia study, the von Lommel study, and so forth. All of these things, the Kenneth Ring study of near-death experiences of the blind, etc. All of that is in chapter 5 of that book, The Soul's Upward Yearning. So that would be worth definitely reading. Also, in those near-death experiences, there is evidence of a loving God through that. Second area, of course, Christian revelation, unequivocally, Jesus equates God with the father of the prodigal son. And if you know that story or that parable, you'll see that the prodigal son really has committed everything wrong you could possibly do, right? He betrays his family, shames his family, leaves them, takes his inheritance, goes off to the land of the Gentiles, right? The non-elect, betrays his people, betrays his call, betrays his election, spends all the money on dissolute living and prostitutes, basically betraying God, betraying Torah, and finally lives with the pigs, highly unclean animals. And who is the Father? Who is God? Because this parable should be called the parable of the father of the prodigal son. And in that parable, Jesus describes the Father who is God, his Abba, right, who comes out, rushes out to meet the boy in perfect joy. The boy's trying to get the speech, rolled out, and the father is giving him a tunic, dress my boy like royalty, giving him sandals. Don't let him be a slave anymore without sandals on his feet. Gives him the family ring, right? Jewish men don't wear rings for merely, purposes of adornment, right? It has the sign of the family on it. You belong to my family 100%, and kills the fatted calf. That's the real God of Jesus Christ. Therefore, the angry God, the terrifying God, the stoic God, the disgusted God, these are gods, that Jesus Christ basically is kind of eliminating from view in his revelation of the unconditional love of God, not only in the Father of the prodigal son, but in his selection of love as the highest commandment, his use of the name of God, name of Abba for God, which of course is like affectionate, trustworthy father, daddy, almost. These are the things that come from Christian revelation. But from the universe itself, very, very briefly, what you're asking there, there really is, evidence of God, God's love even in the universe. Because as you look at it, and you have to have kind of an enlightened view of this, right? Because sometimes it looks like the universe is very hostile, right? Because there are earthquakes and there's lightning and there's all kinds of disease and things of that nature. But if you look at it, the universe, and especially the earth that we live in, is really about 90% really friendly. In fact, make it 97% really friendly and about 3% hostile. Okay. Now, of course, there are hostile
So, Father,
elements,
we have to, I don't want to be hostile,
okay.
but I want to be friendly, but we're just about out of time. And of course, as you mentioned, how beautiful the universe is, and beauty obviously is something that shows reflection of God and how wonderful he is. And next week we'll be back with you talking about the evidence of God's existence. Is there evidence of God's existence from philosophy? So think about that. We'll talk next week. Great to see you, Father. Thank you so much. Again, Father Spitzer, his universe, closing for another week, and some wonderful materials available, including the one book he just mentioned, The Soul's Upward Yearning. go to our EWTNRC.com and you can see all the books available through EWTN's religious catalog. And don't forget to post your questions on Facebook and email us. We rely on your questions to keep this program going. We want to answer the questions you have out there. And again, wonderful resources that are all available through the EWTN Religious Catalog as well. And you can see them on the screen right now, as well as at the magiscenter.com, a wonderful website of Father Spitzer's. And I'm Doug Keck. Join us next week as we re-enter Father Spitzer's universe. Thanks so much for spending time with us. Goodbye.